Hello everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to make a capacitor discharge tool. Now, why do you need a capacitor discharge tool? Well, capacitors store a lot of energy, and discharging them by shorting them with a screwdriver can actually destroy the capacitor, if not ruin the terminals on it. This is a 440 AC capacitor here that I'm using, and basically there's a few reasons to have a capacitor discharge tool. Number one reason is safety. It keeps your fingers away from any of the terminals and any of the high voltages that may be stored in that capacitor. Number two, it discharges it slowly, which reduces the chance of hurting internally the capacitor. If you discharge a capacitor too quickly, you can internally damage the capacitor and then shorten its life. And third reason, no sparks. Basically, when you're using a capacitor discharge tool, you'll have no sparks if you've done it right, and basically that reduces the chances of any accidental fire or ignition of anything because of the sparks coming off of it. And I'd say third, you're not going to ruin your screwdrivers. And again, it's a safety issue. So today I'm going to show you how to create one of these capacitor discharge tools using some of the things I have here. Really, the basic tools you're going to need, or supplies you're going to need, are a 12 gauge. I'm using 12 gauge wire here. This is copper wound wire. A 25 watt iron, some solder, and primarily the most important part here will be a resistor. This is a 5 watt 10 kilo ohm ceramic wound capacitor. That's what I'm going to be using as a resistor for this circuit. If you had just those things, the resistor, the 12 gauge wire, the solder, and the soldering iron, you could basically get away with building a very, very basic capacitor discharge tool, something like this that I did here. This is really basic, but if you want to go and do it right, and if you're going to use it a lot, you'll want it to last. That configuration I just showed you won't last very long. It'll break apart in no time. So the other things I used were heat shrink tubing, lighter to shrink the tubing, wire cutters, a pair of needle nose. Again, you don't need all these tools, but if you have them, use them. I've got a knife if you don't have a wire stripper, you can use a knife to strip the wire, but I got a self-adjusting wire stripper, which is beautiful for this kind of job. A set of helping hands are also very handy when you're soldering, and basically that's it. A couple of zip ties here. I got 3 or 4. You only need 2 really, and what I'm going to use those for is to secure the wire around the resistor. So I'll show you all that as I go along. So next thing, now my capacitor is a 440 volt 70 picofarad or 70 picofarad or 370 volt picofarad capacitor for an AC unit. Now, different capacitors have different amount of energy, therefore require different discharging qualities. I'll show you a calculator that I used to do this with on the net, which will basically tell you how big a resistor you need to discharge it slowly. Now, for me, slowly is 30 seconds or so to discharge from fully charged or down to 0. I don't think it has to be discharged any slower than that, but it's up to you and the capacitor you're using. And again, if you're fixing AC units all the time, I think this would be a really handy tool to have, as safety is a concern, number one. Number two, you don't want to be blowing up these capacitors for your customers or for yourself. And basically having this tool is going to keep that from happening. So let's next go to the capacitor discharge calculator I found on the internet, and I'll show you that and how that works, and then we'll move on from there to building this thing. This is the capacitor discharge calculator that I used to calculate how big a resistor I needed for my discharge tool. And again, if you're not using the same or discharging the same kind of capacitor as I am, then a different resistance would be obviously a better thing for you to work with. So I'm just showing you how I came up with my number. Now, the capacitor I'm dealing with is 440 volts, so we're going to put 440 volts into it. into this calculation. I'm assuming it's going to be fully charged. So 440 volts. The time, well, I would like it to be discharged in 30 seconds and no longer. I mean, you know, if it does, well, we'll play with it. But I'm going to say 30 seconds. And I bought 10 kilo ohm resistors, 5-watt resistors, because of this calculator. And so you'll see the results of my calculation, or this calculation, on the actual capacitor. So here we're going to go to microfarads, which again you can switch here, but I'm in kilo ohms, I'm in seconds, and I'm in microfarads. Okay, so you choose what capacitor you're working with, but my capacitor is 70 microfarads. So we hit calculate here, and you can see that the amount of voltage the capacitor was discharged was 440 volts and 000 volts. So I know that in 30 seconds this is going to discharge to 0. And actually I played with this and found out that it's actually 21 seconds is the minimum time. You can see there that it's still 000 and fully discharged. And if I go to 20, it starts showing some charge remaining. Very, very little, but there it is, right? So you know, I wanted 30 seconds, so you can play with this to get what you want. And the other part is I was using a dual run capacitor, so the other portion of the capacitor was 5 microfarads. So let's do a calculation here and see how long it takes for that to happen. And you can see that 20 seconds is way more than enough for 5 microseconds. So, you know, probably a microfarad, sorry. And here we're going to go to 2 seconds to calculate this. So 2 seconds, it would do it in less than 2 seconds, a 5 microfarad. And the 5 microfarad capacitor in my system is for the fan. And as you can see, it discharges it very quickly. In 2 seconds, in 1 second, it's almost 0. And in 2 seconds, a 5 microfarad fan capacitor would be down to 0. So this is a very, very good number for me. The 10 kilo ohm resistor for the type of microfarad capacitors and voltages on those capacitors that I'm using is perfect for this, more than perfect for this range. So if you're using different capacitors, or you have a different, you're not doing this on an AC capacitor, you're doing it on a, let's say, microwave, or a what else could be, a stereo or whatever. Come in here, calculate what you need, and then buy the appropriate resistor for your purpose. So that's how you figure out the discharging calculations that you need to know in order to discharge your capacitor. And I will show you how I discharge it using this tool that we're going to make. So let's get at it. Number one thing here is your wire. You determine how much lead you want with this. I'm going to make mine fairly long, probably about a foot of a 12 gauge wire. That's about a foot, yeah. And so I'm just going to cut that, my wire cutters, and then get another one and do the same thing. 2 leads you're going to need. There we go. So now we have 2 1-foot leads here. It's up to you how long you make them. This is the size I chose. Next we're going to strip them. I use my wire strippers here. And now if you don't have a set of these things, these are beautiful. This is a beautiful tool. It's a self-adjusting wire stripper. It just makes stripping wires very easy. I'm going to put a link to all this stuff in the video description for you, so you can see how that works. And I'm going to strip about 1 inch off of these, and I'll show you why in a second. So put them in here. There we go. You can see how this works. Really nice tool. And twist it, and then twist that piece off. There we go. So there's 1 inch on that side. I'm going to do the other side. Same thing again. Use my new beautiful tool here. And we'll do that same thing to the other wire. So now we have 2 leads of equal length with about 1 inch of wire stripped off the ends of each one. Next thing we're going to do is going to show you the resistor. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to wrap this wire, the leads off this resistor, there we go, around the leads here. And whatever's left over doesn't really matter. Okay, I'm going to wrap my lead from my resistor around the lead from my wire here. And you see that it has a slight turn to it. I'm going to turn it some more when I'm done wrapping it, but first I'm going to wrap it like so. And I'm not going to solder it until I get it fully wrapped up the way I want. I'll show you why here, because once you solder this wire, it gets really stiff. So there it is, wrapped around the lead, and I'm going to move the lead like so, because basically what I want to do is make an S on both sides like that. And I'm not doing a great job of it right there. What I want to do is I want to start the bend of this wire like so, and I'm going to crimp it down a little bit with my pliers. And what it's going to do is go around this way, and I'm going to do the same with the other side. And what that's going to do after I'm done, after I heat shrink this, and sorry, after I tin it and then solder it up, basically, is I'm going to solder it, and then I'm going to heat shrink it, and then I'm going to wrap it around the resistor in this direction. And I'm going to do the same with the other side. And the reason being is that I want to reduce the amount of bending and strain on between the resistor and the lead that comes out of the resistor. And by doing that, wrapping it and then heat shrinking it, and then I'm going to put some zip ties around the heat shrink, and you'll see the whole process. But basically right now, just note that I wrapped it in this fashion, and that I bent the wire in that direction. And now I'm going to use my pliers to tighten it all that up, and then bend it, leave it like this until I tin it, and then bend it around the resistor. So I'll show you all that next. All right, so here you can see where my helping hands are coming in quite handy. The wire is going to get really hot when I tin it with solder, so having that tool hold that unit for me is going to make my life much easier. So I'm going to heat it up, solder some, basically put lead all over it, and let the copper wire drink that in. Like so. And after I'm done on the top, I'll flip it over into the other side just to make sure we got good coverage all the way around. And this will make this wire much stiffer, by the way, once this cools down. There you go. Look at that. That is absorbing the lead really nicely. Okay, let me flip it around. There's the other side. It needs a little bit more on the other side just to cover it up. Next step will be there it is, tinned up. Next step will be putting the heat shrink on this side and then doing the other side exactly the same way. So I'm going to use some 3/16 heat shrink tubing here, and basically about, I don't know, about an inch. And I'm going to wrap it around that elbow that I made there, and then heat shrink that onto it. And I'm going to do that using a lighter. Use what you wish, whatever heat source you want to make the tubing shrink. So let's do that first. And the toughest part is going to be making it go around that corner. So let's just push it around there, see if I can get it to go. And there we go. Just force it a little bit. Yeah, it does scrunch up, but it doesn't matter that it's scrunched up because you just turn it and it will unscrunch up. So there we go. The whole point is to insulate that so that it doesn't arc anywhere and it doesn't short or anything like that, basically. And we're going to put more heat shrink around this too. All right, I've got my heat shrink around the actual lead there. I'm going to apply some heat to it with my lighter, and that should make it the tubing shrink. Like so. On one side, turn it around, do the other side. Let's do that here. And that's it. Now that side of the resistor is now insulated and attached to the lead. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And it's going to wrap around in this direction as well. All right, there's the finished resistor with the leads soldered on and the heat shrink tubing on them. I suggest not doing what I did in tinning the whole piece of copper. I would just tin the first 1/4 inch or 3 millimeters of the actual wire that you wrap the actual lead from the resistor, because it makes this tinning the whole copper wire just turns it into basically a copper and lead rod. It's very, very hard to bend without breaking the leads. So just tin the very, very tip of the wire, about 3 millimeters or 1/4 inch or so. I'm going to be using a 39/64 width heat shrink tubing on this, and enough to cover you know, over the wires on both sides. So I'm just going to cut that off right now, like so. Zoom this out a bit here. There we go. And as you can see, it'll cover both sides. And after I've got the heat shrink on it, I'm going to use the zip ties around the resistor. And the basic reason for all of this is to keep the wire from bending at this point here and this point here, because that's where it's going to break. It's going to, you know, basically metal fatigue on both where the wire goes into the resistor. So you want to keep those from bending as much as possible, and that'll make this whole thing last much longer. Get the heat shrink tubing and the resistor centered up there. I'm just going to heat it up, shrink it down. Take a while, there's a lot of heat shrink tubing here. Alright, I think it's pretty well as tight as it's going to get. And next I'm going to put the zip ties around the resistor just to make it that much more stiff. What I did is I heated the ends up and used my needle nose to crimp down while they were hot, thus sealing the whole unit up. And it's fairly stiff at this point, but still, my zip ties around the resistor here just to stiffen the wires up one little bit more, and you know, basically make the whole unit, you know, much more solid and less likely to fail in the future. Give it some. On that side, basically holding that wire nice and stiff. Wire's nice and stiff, and I'm gonna put another one on this side. I'm making sure that I'm going around the resistor and the wires. Okay, nice and hard, nice and stiff on both sides. Yep. Leads. There we go. So there's a resistor pack all done. Zip tied up, heat shrunk up. I cut the excess here off, I guess. I'm going to do that right there and there. There we go. Here's what it looks like. Functional, resistors in the end. The wires are nice and stiff. They're not going to be pulling on the connections to the resistor. At this point, I'm going to solder the alligator clips on the ends, and I'll show you that next. So the first thing you're going to want to do before you put the alligator clip on the actual terminating end of the lead of your capacitor discharge tool is to take the insulator off the alligator, or the shroud, or the rubber glove around that alligator clip off. Then take the actual shroud here, put it on the wire and slide it down and in. And as you can see here, I've already tinned this a little bit, but I'm going to tin the whole wire and then put the alligator clip on there and solder it onto the actual lead. And so let's just tin it right now. There it is, really nice. Okay, and next I'm going to crimp the two little tangs on this alligator clip. You can see right there around the wire. Try not to be in the shot too much. Have to do this. I'm right-handed. Try to stay out of the shot as much as possible. Crimped on the end. Now I'm going to use some solder and basically solder it back onto this wire so it never comes off and conducts electricity really nicely. There we go, got some good flow going on there. And yes, I am using a lot. That's it. Nice and hot. Anyways, but there's my big glob of solder in there. And as you can see now, it's really grip on it. It's not going anywhere. Next, I'm going to just slide the insulator over the top of that. Finish that job and do the same thing on the other one. Okay, so sliding the insulator on is pretty simple. Close the alligator clip. There we go. There's one lead done. Going to do the same thing with the other black lead, and then we'll go and test this unit out and see what we get for a result. All right, here's what the discharge looks like without the discharge tool. I'm going to use a screwdriver across these two terminals. And this is not the way I recommend doing this, as it can damage the capacitor and it definitely creates a lot of sparks, which if you're in a hazardous area could be a flame issue. So here we go. I'm going to show you how this looks like and why I built this tool, because I do not like doing this this way. Now remember, I'm using an insulated screwdriver and I'm holding the handle so that I don't get shocked here. That's nasty. And you know, if you're working at some customer's office or some customer's place and they're nearby, you don't want them seeing that. You don't want them anywhere near that, and you don't want that to happen. So as you saw, a very large flash and a lot of energy discharge there. It's not pleasant. If there's oil or something on top of it, it could ignite the oil. It could do all sorts of nasty stuff. So that's why you don't want to use the screwdriver across there. Though it does work, it is discharged now, and you should use a screwdriver after you've discharged it with a tool as well, just to be sure. But as you saw there, that was pretty nasty shock. And if you can see if I can show you this. Now you can see that there's some shock, some burn on those terminals at the end too. Okay, so it damages the terminals as well. It's not good for the capacitor. It's just not good all the way around. So I'm going to charge this all up again, and I'm going to discharge it with the capacitor discharge tool that we built, and you'll see that there'll be no spark and that this happens quite quickly anyway. And it's a much more pleasant way of doing this. All right, so I recharged the capacitor with 120 volts, and you saw how nasty that discharge was when I did it with a screwdriver last. And that was only 120 volts. This capacitor is rated for 440. So you can imagine how bad the spark would be if you did it when that was fully charged. So next I'm going to hook this meter up to this capacitor so that you can see. And notice that I'm using insulated alligator clips just to be safe. And there's our discharge tool, and I'm connecting the discharge tool and the negative to the meter on the common post on the capacitor, as you can see there. And we're going to take this and discharge it safely using our tool, and I'll show you how much voltage is on this prior to it. So let's just plug that in. 160, so that's a lot. Let's connect our tool, and you can see it quickly discharging that, safely doing it. No big spark or discharge, arcing or any of that. Totally safe way to do this. That's the way you want to discharge these capacitors. So this is my discharge capacitor tool. I recommend you make one to do these things. After you've discharged it, make sure you discharge both poles here. And you know, at this point I know both of them are safe. And also make sure that you check and make sure with your meter that you've got no voltage anywhere. And I don't, so this is discharge here. And just to make double sure, at the end of this, use your screwdriver to short the common to both terminals, and then you'll know that it's safe to handle without any issue at all. And another thing I was cautioned about too was that some of these capacitors, the oil can actually store some residual current, and it can recharge a little bit all on its own. So let's see if that's true here in this case. Nah, she's dead. That tool drained it perfectly. It didn't even get warm. So you saw that it was about 160 there. Discharged it quickly, about 20-30 seconds. If you had 440 in this, it would take longer. But again, you can always use a meter to check and see how much charge is left on it, or you can just plug it in, leave it on a couple minutes, and it should be discharged. Now, you saw the tool that I used to calculate how long it should take. So if it's fully charged, use that tool as a guide to tell you, hey, if it takes 41 seconds for it to discharge on the actual calculation, then leave it on for a minute. And always check it with your meter, and always after you're done checking it with the meter, use a screwdriver to short out the terminals just to make doubly sure that it's discharged. That's it for my video. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video and it helped you out in some way, do me a favor, click on the like button right down here. And you know, if you wish to subscribe to my channel, just click on this link up here, and that should subscribe you to the Richard Lloyd channel, or Richard Lloyd USA channel. Okay, again, thank you very much for your time and watching.